India correspondent Akshay Dongre joins us on the phone line. Akshay, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, second leg of his five-nation visit. He is in Trinidad and Tobago. A special welcome there by the Prime Minister of the island nation. Just take us through the visuals that we just witnessed just a short while ago.
Well, Shubhendu, it was a rousing welcome for the Prime Minister. In fact, almost the entire cabinet of the Trinidad and Tobago government came at the airport in Port of Spain to receive the Prime Minister, along with the Trinidad Prime Minister as well, Prasar Bharati. So as far as the welcome is concerned, it had about 40 ministers and senators, an entire cabinet at the airport to welcome the Prime Minister. Was a special sight, and in fact, it goes on to show the kind of bonhomie between the two countries, the kind of links that the countries have, as well as the friendship that has been fostered over the last several years, as far as the relation between the two countries is concerned, as well, on shared values, on cultural similarities, and the living bridge of the Indian diaspora that are now comprised to over 40% of the overall population of the Caribbean nation. So as far as
Akshay, stay with us while we look at visuals of cultural welcome received by Prime Minister Narendra Modi as he arrived at Port of Spain. Those visuals coming in from Port of Spain airport. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has arrived in Trinidad and Tobago. Special musical welcome received by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at Port of Spain, capital of Trinidad and Tobago. DD India correspondent Akshay Dongre continues to be with me on the phone line. Akshay, there a very colourful musical welcome for Prime Minister, and we see elements of Indian traditions and also local dance forms all coming together to welcome Prime Minister.
Cultural similarities, the cultural bonhomie between the two countries, and how the Gidmitia people who came here, which is the indentured laborers who came here, they brought their folklore, they brought in their culture, and over these years, in 4 and 5 generations, how the culture has evolved to adapt the local culture and embed it into a new form of art and culture that was clearly on display here at the airport in Port of Spain. So it was, in fact, a rousing welcome, and it's quite special to see, important to see that the Prime Minister was not alone to welcome Prime Minister Narendra Modi here. She was accompanied by almost the entire cabinet, ministers, senators, over 40 ministers and senators lined up to welcome Prime Minister Narendra Modi, along with several of their family members as well. So it was, in fact, indeed quite a rousing welcome that was on display for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Kamala Prasar, who is the Prime Minister, has been re-elected recently, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's arrival to Trinidad and Tobago is also quite a special occasion for the people of the Caribbean nation as well. As they also get to see the Prime Minister of a country from where their ancestors came in from, of majority of the population. So that was indeed a special sight to see. Now from here, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has now moved to the hotel where another rousing welcome awaits him, where the people of Indian diaspora will be coming to welcome Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Port of Spain, followed by the community event that is going to take place in the country as well. So the Prime Minister is on a five-nation tour, and Trinidad and Tobago holds a very special place, also because the cultural connect as well as the growing bond between the two countries is also very, very interesting to see. While it is thousands of miles away from India, the thread of culture, the living bridge of diaspora, that continues to keep the two countries very, very close. So we'll see more of the cooperation as well as bonhomie between the two countries, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi also tomorrow also addresses the joint session of the Parliament. He will be meeting the President of the country as well, and before leaving for Argentina, there will be several of these cultural performances that will be put on display for Prime Minister, and several areas of cooperation that will be not only highlighted but enhanced as far as the two countries are concerned. So there's a lot to learn between the two countries. India can learn a lot from Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago can get to learn a lot from India, especially in several of the sectors, including sports. And that is also, before coming to other points, sports also remains a very, very important point which connects the two countries. As we all know that Trinidad and Tobago is part of West Indies. Here in Port of Spain, there is a stadium that has names of Indian cricketers along with other cricketers who have played here, and one of some of very important names includes Sunil Gavaskar as well, who remains one of the highest run scorers in the country. So cricket remains a very, very popular sport in the country. That also goes on to connect the two cultures together. Moving on to other aspects of cooperation, maritime security, as well as other joint ventures can be explored. Memorandums of understanding can be signed in various aspects of society, including education, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, defense, and other areas, including energy security. Lot more in the days to come. Not only in Trinidad and Tobago, Prime Minister will be going to Argentina, then Brazil, and then Namibia as well. And he has already been to Ghana. So this is a five-nation tour. A very, very important visit by Prime Minister to the five nations. Bringing not only Latin America but also Africa closer together. So it is indeed global South's power on display, as well as efforts continue by the Indian Prime Minister to not only connect the global South closer together but also enhance cooperation among the countries.
Akshay, thank you for joining us with those updates. We'll keep coming back to you for more as Prime Minister begins the second leg of his five-nation visit. Prime Minister has reached Port of Spain. That's the capital of Trinidad and Tobago. Akshay, one of the points he mentioned about was the common linkage between India and the Caribbean nation, cricket. Cricket has served as a soft power and bridge between India and the Caribbean. The world still remembers Sunil Gavaskar's explosive century and double century on the Queen's Park Oval pitch in Port of Spain in 1971, which laid the foundation of India's first ever Test series win against the West Indies. Let's turn to Akshay for more.
Trinidad and Tobago and India have a lot of historic connections, from diaspora to sports, culture and tradition. But one thing, if it stands out when it comes to the relations between Trinidad and Tobago and India, it is sports and especially cricket. And to show you how significant the cultural tie, the sports ties are between the two countries, and it goes back way into history, we are at a very special stadium. This is the Queen's Park Oval Stadium where we are standing right now, and this is the historic stadium from where in 1971 Sunil Gavaskar made his historic 220 runs, and that score also led to India's victory, and that was and is still the highest runs that have been scored on this ground. Sunil Gavaskar also scored a century in 1971 Test series, and then once again in 1976. And then there have been several other Indian cricketers who have scored centuries and several runs here, taken a lot of wickets that have ensured India's victory. There have been a lot of competition between West Indies and India, and especially here in Port of Spain, the capital of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is that very pitch from where Sunil Gavaskar played that cricket match and scored that historic 220 runs. The ties between the two countries is quite deep when it comes to the diaspora, when it comes to food, language, and especially when we talk about cricket. Both the countries have equal amount of love when it comes to the gentleman's game. In today's time, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi comes to Trinidad and Tobago, sports is also one aspect of the ties between the two countries that will take a center stage. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been promoting sports ties with several countries, especially the friendly countries with whom we have already played several games, not just cricket but other games as well. And as India diversifies its own sports teams in different sports, one thing that takes the center stage in this visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi that is also historic can be sports. With camera person Mohit Oiki, I'm Akshay Dongre, DD India.
Professor Rahul Mishra, both India and the West Indies have been cricket-crazy nations, a glue that unites both the sides, and that also translates into the kind of diplomacy that they exercise, sports bringing two nations together, as a reporter was presenting.
Yes, absolutely. I think cricket is one thing away from these professional discussions of diplomacy and politics and economic engagement. This is something that brightens the eyes of Indians whenever you mention cricket and cricket connections with any of the countries across the world. It really brightens the Indian audience and scholars alike. So I think it is really one of the solid bonds between India and the Caribbean region. Of course, West Indies has been seen as the most profound role player in Indian cricket history in a number of ways. How India and West Indies cricket matches back in the past were seen, the West Indies bowlers, their role, and also I think Trinidad and Tobago, West Indies, these countries, their contribution to the Indian Premier League is also something that we must take note of. A number of Indian origin batters and bowlers have also made significant contributions to the cricket overall, but also in connecting India and Indian community with the Caribbean, that is based in the Caribbean region. So cricket, I think, is a very important bridge between India and Trinidad and Tobago, but also between India and the Caribbean region.
Right. Another bridge, Ambassador Wadhwa, would be the common culture, the music. I just want to refer to that special welcome that Prime Minister Narendra Modi received at Port of Spain. We look at those visuals, the elements of Indians' dance traditions, music, drums. There are also people wearing hats, and there are people wearing traditional Indian crowns. Message of assimilation that Prime Minister often speaks about Indian diaspora, that it takes everyone along, it gets into the color of the host nation, a message that he also delivered in the Ghanaian parliament earlier, that particular unique characteristic of the Indian diaspora. An example of that we see in the traditional welcome.
Absolutely. I think, across the world, you find that, as far as possible, the Indian diaspora try to carry forward the traditions of the times of their forefathers whenever they migrated or they were taken away as indentured labor. And those traditions then continue to get passed down from generation to generation. Very often we find that the language that they speak is also stuck in time. It does not evolve at all. In fact, it's a purer form of the language than even what is spoken in the regions that they migrated from. For example, Bihar or Eastern UP, in this case, in Trinidad. And you find that most of the traditions that were started at that time by their forefathers are now handed down from generation to generation. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, of course, a very interesting evolution has taken place where there is a mix between the Indian music and also the traditional Indian music and also the calypso, the local music, so producing calypso. And many of these younger generation of the diaspora have become very famous for their compositions because it combines words and language, Indian language, along with the local language. So it's a kind of a mixture, and that's why it's called chutney music in particular. And you find that chutney music has become even popular in not only this region but also back home here in India and in Bihar and Eastern UP because it has a linkage with the original music which was carried by the forefathers of the diaspora there.
Right. Professor Mishra, your thoughts on the manner in which this cultural assimilation takes place. Prime Minister often talks about India as a land of diversity, but it also engages with the diversity of the world and brings out new colors in it. And we saw an example of that play out at the airport.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the remarkable features of Indian diaspora is the diversity that they have brought along wherever they've gone. So whether it is Fiji or Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname or Guyana or even Malaysia, we see that this diversity that is witnessed in India in terms of religions or cultural backgrounds, the languages and dialects, food habits, the culinary practices, and also the religious practices. Everything shows this diversity that India has, and it is reflected in countries across the globe. Wherever Indian community is present in a sizable number, we see that when it comes to diversity depicted, it is more like mini India across so many mini Indias across the world that you've witnessed. And I think what we saw here on the visuals on the screen is a reflection of that. The connection that you have of traditions and these dance forms, the languages, I think it is very important to also notice that the roots are there, but we need to sort of revitalize these connections. So linkages between Uttar Pradesh or Eastern UP and Bihar and Trinidad and Tobago need to be recultivated. We need to go back to history and see how we can reconnect these two cultural hubs. And I think in that sense, we also need to come up with a more provincialized diaspora policy, giving these states an opportunity to reconnect. For example, Ramayana or Ramcharitmanas is very popular in Trinidad and Tobago or in Suriname. And there, UP government could play a more important role, perhaps, along with Bihar. So Bhojpuri festivals, literature and language festivals, could be another way. So I think Ramayana festivals have been happening for quite some time, but giving states an opportunity to play a more salient role is something that perhaps should be considered moving forward.
Right, let's turn to some more updates coming in from Port of Spain. Indian High Commissioner Pradeep Rajpurohit spoke with Akshay Dongre about the cultural and historic similarities between the two countries and how both countries can benefit from closer cooperation.
We have a very special guest with us, the Indian High Commissioner to Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Pradeep Rajpurohit. Sir, thank you so much for speaking with us. It was in 1962 when the diplomatic ties were established between the two countries. And since then, a lot has been achieved, but a lot has to be achieved as well. So what are the areas of cooperation do you think can be enhanced with this visit?
There are complementarities. Trinidad and Tobago, as you know, has been an oil and gas rich country, and down the line they have dominated their sectors, but they are now looking to diversify their economy, and a number of areas where they are looking for collaboration with us. This includes areas like renewable energy, health and pharmaceuticals, education, modern agriculture, technologies, trade, capacity building, and many more.
How do you think this brings the two countries closer together diplomatically and in other aspects as well of economy, trade, culture?
For that, you have to understand Trinidad and Tobago's demography. They are half of them, about 40-45% of their population is of Indian origin. Yes. And you will see that is a mini Bharat here. You have all the festivals, the food, the cuisine, you see the clothes, apparels, everywhere around you see deep imprint of India, our culture, tradition, all around. Very recently, that in April, they had the general election. The new party, United National Congress, has come to power, and this has largely dominated by the Indian community.
Prime Minister has made India a rising star in front of the world. Also, he has talked about the global south, and India and both Trinidad and Tobago are part of this. So do you think that this visit is going to amplify that further?
Well, as you see, as India is the largest country in South Asia, similarly, Trinidad and Tobago is the largest country in terms of population and in terms of economy in this part of the what we call CARICOM region. And they have similar priorities, developing countries, in terms of the priorities of the global south, sustainable development, climate change, disaster management, and several other areas. There are convergence of views. They are leading voices in their respective regions. There have been close collaboration and close working together in many of these areas. So this is a and a very opportune occasion that the leaders from both the countries are going to meet and discuss many of these issues which are at the top of the priorities of the global south.
The Indian High Commissioner to Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Pradeep Rajpurohit, with us, talking to us about all the aspects of Prime Minister's visit, with camera person Mohit and Saurav Shukla, Akshay Dongre for DD India.
And taking cue from what Indian High Commissioner spoke about, Ambassador Wadhwa, the potential for development partnership and capacity building inputs that India is capable of providing in the global south, in this case Trinidad and Tobago, areas in particular, agriculture and capacity building in education, key interventions that could play out for the island nations.
Yes, of course. And I think it's important to remember that Trinidad and Tobago, ahead of this visit, has already expressed interest in skilling and also the digital technology and artificial intelligence, as well as the governance aspects of development. They're also looking forward to more collaboration in anything to do with innovation. So whether it's agriculture, as the High Commissioner mentioned, the new techniques in agriculture, or even in terms of disaster management or mitigation, and newer techniques, so which would help them in renewable energy, because they're trying to diversify the economy from the traditional oil and gas sector. So all these are important for them at the moment. They're one country which is looking ahead, not depending only on the reserves that they have of oil and gas. And I must say they've done an excellent job of development of these sectors, their traditional sectors already. So once they diversify, I think the economy in Trinidad and Tobago is going to take off. It's already, as the High Commissioner mentioned, the most prominent economy in the CARICOM region, and they're set to do much, much better with the help of other countries of Global South, like India.
And Ambassador Wadhwa, given the resources and the potential that the Caribbean region has, It's also a competitive region, as Professor Mishra earlier mentioned about the Chinese presence in the region, their own interest. Is this a competitive space for India in that sense? Ambassador Wadhwa, if you could comment on that. I mean,
Yes, of course.
it's the Chinese,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, there is an interest from the Chinese to increase their influence in the region as well, as it is in Latin America in general, and also in Africa
Yes.
as well as Asia, which we've seen. Of course, that interest is there. But as far as Trinidad is concerned, and even Guyana, I would say, the because of the large diaspora population from India in these countries, you have a natural advantage here. And India enjoys that strong cultural tradition, which other countries don't have, and that is why it's important to capitalize on that and to concentrate on Indian companies making this as a hub country for me taking advantage of the trading opportunities which arise because of the free trade area that CARICOM provides as a whole. And this is a natural choice, and it's well chosen for the visit of the Prime Minister this time.
Right. Professor Mishra, that's an important point. How people to people linkages, common cultural legacy gives you a sort of strategic advantage on the diplomatic platform.
Yes, indeed, it gives you a strategic advantage. It's a very good plus in the overall relationship. But the point is that you have to work on it. You have to overcome the inertia that exists there in cultural and civilizational bonds. I mean, these are very emotional. These have a very good sentimental value. But how do you translate this into actionable plans and which are driven by the growth agenda is something that needs to be worked upon. Trinidad and Tobago offers a very good opportunity for India in trade and investment, energy supplies, global south, also working as a regional hub for energy supplies, as I mentioned earlier. But how do we work with Trinidad and Tobago in translating our plans and visions is something that is worth the time of policymakers sitting at the South Block and also in the Prime Minister's office. So I think a lot has to be done to really bring this relationship to the next level, and action is something that has to be done in this. Trinidad and Tobago could also, if we look at the smaller developing island nations, Trinidad and Tobago could work as India's foothold in the Atlantic region. So beyond the Indo-Pacific, this is one area where India can work very well with the CARICOM nations, with the Caribbean nations, and have something that establishes India as a reliable long-term partner for the next 30, 40 years, keeping India's vision of 2047 Viksit Bharat as the driving force.
Ambassador Wadhwa, this point about India's engagement with the region as a whole, with CARICOM, how do you also trace how this relationship has evolved in the recent years with greater momentum that India has provided as far as the ties with the CARICOM nations are concerned?
Yes, we've seen this, evolving in the last decade or so. In particular, we saw this happening already with the Prime Minister's visit to Guyana last year, and during that visit, there was also a CARICOM summit with India, which was organized. And then we've seen that there is a renewed interest as far as Indian companies are concerned in the region because of the advantages that it provides by having a foothold in one or the other countries in the region, because it opens up a market which is there to be exploited. It was not so in earlier days, but I think Indian companies are now looking to go outside the normal spheres that they used to dominate in. It was East Africa, for instance, earlier, but now they're also branching off into the western part of Africa. Ghana, for example, was chosen quite carefully by the Prime Minister in that context. So we find also in Latin America, a number of companies are now expanding from India. So just like China is increasing its footprint, the Indian companies are also trying to do the same. It's a question of your capacity to expand and the markets that you need and the resources that are required back home for your own economy. So all that has come together in the Indian case also. And I'm sure that in going forward, there will be much more interest from Indian companies in the region.
And these engagements, Ambassador Vadava, also important in the context of the current geopolitics. So when we see growing protectionism really coming back into fashion as far as major economies are concerned, in such a context, India making an important outreach to the nations of the global south.
Oh, absolutely, because you need diversification. You can't put your eggs in one basket. We've seen that happening already in the last or so years after COVID, where the dependencies of a number of countries on China actually backfired on them, and they're looking for trusted partnerships from where if need be, they could source important materials. It is already happening in the India-China context, so five or six areas where China is putting restrictions on exports to India. For example, India is looking at other sources or trying to manufacture itself in order to make sure that the supply chains are protected going forward. So this is a trend which has emerged in the last few years in the world. I think it's going to get even more pronounced as we go along because of the policies that a number of governments around the world are now following. And the multilateral trading system itself is quite shell shocked at the moment because it's paralyzed, not allowed to function. So until that happens, we will see this trend prevailing and possibly strengthening. So in countries like India, which require resources and which depend on certain commodities for its growth, we'll have to look at alternatives and new means of acquiring these materials.
Professor Rahul Mishra, if you look at Prime Minister Modi's visit to Trinidad and Tobago from a more macro view, from the perspective of India's outreach to the global south, give us some insight into the dynamics of global south and the changing geopolitics as it exists. And when India is often referred to as the important leader of the global south, how is that an active engagement with this region?
Well, global south is a fascinating concept. Looking at the fragmented international system that we have, it is no longer unipolar. It is no longer a cohesive international order.
Professor Mishra, I'll just stop you for a moment. We're getting more updates from Trinidad and Tobago. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is being warmly greeted by the Indian diaspora of Trinidad and Tobago as he arrived at the nation. Those visuals were just coming in, carrying Indian flag and in traditional Indian attire. The Indian diaspora at the hotel these visuals are coming from.
बोलो भारत माता की बोलो भारत माता की बोलो भारत माता की जय। बोलो भारत माता की जय। बोलो भारत माता की जय। बोलो भारत माता की। बोलो भारत माता की जय। बोलो भारत माता की जय। बोलो भारत माता की जय। बोलो भारत माता की।
With chants of Bharat Mata Ki Jai, enthusiastic welcome there for Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Trinidad and Tobago. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi engages with the Indian diaspora, there's traditional music, attire and Indian flag. India and Trinidad and Tobago share a deep-rooted historical, cultural and people-to-people connect. Prime Minister Modi will hold talks with the President and Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. DD India correspondent Akshay Dongre reports from Port of Spain.
This visit, at the invitation of Prime Minister Kamala Prasad Bharati, comes at a time when India is actively expanding its global footprint through partnerships rooted in culture, commerce, and cooperation. With over 40% of Trinidad and Tobago's population being of Indian descent, the emotional and cultural resonance of this visit is immense. The Indian diaspora, some tracing their roots back 5 generations, continues to play a vital role in the country's social and economic fabric. Trinidad and Tobago is also home to a growing number of first-generation Indian entrepreneurs, many of whom see this visit as a chance to boost trade and investment between the two nations.
Prime Minister Modi, I think, is one of the more admired leaders in the world. I think we as Indians are very happy with the progress that we see India making. The people of Trinidad, the Indian people in Trinidad, have always identified very closely with their Indian culture. It's going to strengthen the ties, I think, and I think people are going to identify with it, and I think it will probably push it even further.
The country is very happy to have a visit like him, such a high-profile visit. And it's something that I think a lot of bilateral talks can happen and a lot of trade that can happen for this country, and it could benefit a lot for this country as well, and not only for Trinidad, Tobago, but for the rest of the Caribbean islands as well. And it'll be something that it's a good thing.
During his stay, Prime Minister Modi is expected to hold high-level talks with both President Christine Carla Kangalu and Prime Minister Prasad Bharati. He will also address a special joint session of Parliament, underscoring the importance of this partnership rooted in shared democratic values and historic ties.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Trinidad and Tobago is not just a diplomatic event, it's also a celebration of a people that came to this land 180 years back as indentured labourers and through resilience, strength and endurance have shaped their destiny to become entrepreneurs, policymakers and leaders of this country. With camera person Mohit Uike at Port of Spain in Trinidad and Tobago, Akshay Dongre, DD India.
And in the next report, we trace the journey of the Indian diaspora to Trinidad and Tobago.
On the 30th of May 1845, the Fatal Razak arrived in Trinidad carrying 225 Indian indentured laborers, or Girmitias, the dawn of a transformative chapter in the twin island nation's history. 1845, the Fatal Razak arrives in Trinidad and Tobago with 225 Indians. 1845 to 1917, 143,939 indentured laborers landed in Trinidad and Tobago. 1902, over half of sugarcane farming managed by Indians. 1962, diplomatic ties formalized post-independence. 2025, Indian Trinidadians and Tobagonians form 42% of the population. Over 180 years, the Indian diaspora preserved its culture, built thriving communities, and now stands proudly at the nation's helm, with Indian origin Kamala Prasad Bisesar as Prime Minister of the nation. Clearly, though the Indian diaspora in Trinidad and Tobago had a hard landing on the nation's shores, it has weathered many a storm to emerge at the top of its society.
Primarily, our forefathers came from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, and they brought with them a lot of folk traditions, including their Ramcharita Manas, which is still hugely popular here in Trinidad and Tobago. Our forefathers were simple but profound persons. They were simple in the skills that they came with, but they were very profound in the value system that they came with.
Earlier this year, Prime Minister Modi, speaking in Mauritius on the Girmitias or indentured laborers, recounted the hardships of the community and how, despite the difficulties, the Girmitias kept their culture alive.
आपको जानकर खुशी होगी कि भारत सरकार गिरमिटिया साथियों का एक डेटाबेस बनाने पर काम कर रहा है। मॉरिशस और गिरमिटिया कम्युनिटी से जुड़े अन्य देशों के साथ मिलकर भारत इंडेंचर्ड लेबर रूट्स अंकित करने पर भी काम करेगा।
This year, the Indian diaspora in Trinidad and Tobago is celebrating 180 years of the first indentured laborers landing in the nation.
Well, geographically, India and Trinidad and Tobago are thousands of miles apart. Culturally, they're as close as two countries can be together. And that is due to the living bridge of Indian diaspora that resides here, that has built this country and now comprise about 40% of the total population of this Caribbean country. And this unprecedented and historic visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to bring the two countries even closer together, economically, culturally, and in several other aspects of society. And this is also going to write a new chapter in the ties between the two beautiful nations. With camera person Modoiki, Akshay Dongre, Lead India.
Those were some special stories enumerating the close ties between India and Trinidad and Tobago. Earlier, Prime Minister Narendra Modi receiving an enthusiastic welcome by the Indian diaspora, all ready in their traditional attire and traditional music. Professor Rahul Mishra, the point that you were making earlier, and I had to stop you for a moment, about this visit seen from the lens of India's important outreach to the global south and the significance that it acquires in that context.
Yes, so India's taking these steps to consolidate, to have a collective global south voice, and global south as an agenda has identified the gaps in the contemporary international order, but it is yet to come up with a comprehensive action plan as to what these countries are supposed to do. There are also challenges at the leadership level in the sense that who is going to be the leader of the global south. India, of course, has a normative agency to claim the global south leadership, being part of the non-alignment movement, which was in many ways a representative of this idea that we have to ensure that countries of the developing world have their own voice. They are able to practice their strategic autonomy when it comes to foreign and security policy agendas, and also put forth their developmental concerns, their economic concerns, and have a equitable position at the international system. So global south leadership, China also, even though it is not a developing country anymore, also claims to be a global South leader. So there are things that have to be sorted out. India's role, though, as a global South leader is very much getting manifested in partnerships like these. India's partnership with the CARICOM countries, India CARICOM Summit, with the Pacific Island countries through FIPIC, with Southeast Asian countries through the Act East policy, with Central Asian countries through Connect Central Asia, with African countries through a range of initiatives, is something that is putting a more cohesive picture. But a lot has to be done, and we need to have a long-term agenda as to what should drive Global South to fruition, the idea of Global South to fruition, and how should we go about this whole idea of giving Global South countries their right place in the international system. So as the leader of the Global South, there is a lot that has to be done. But having said that, I must say that this visit, Prime Minister's visit to Ghana, to Trinidad and Tobago, and forthcoming visits to Brazil, to a range of nations, is something that is representative of India's commitment to Global South agenda and India's commitment to prove itself as the leader of the Global South and the concerns that these Global South countries have.
Right. Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, while we've been talking about various capacity building and development partnership, there's one point that India also speaks in very vocal terms, is the value of democracy, the heritage that it celebrates, where Prime Minister has visited so far. In Ghana Parliament, Prime Minister speaks about it. He's also said to speak in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. This shared value of democracy, how is that a distinction factor as far as India's engagement with these nations are concerned?
Yes, so being the largest democracy in the world, India is very much qualified to talk about it. Just this the other day, when I was listening to the Prime Minister talking in the Ghanaian Parliament, I heard him speak about as many as 2,500 political parties existing in India, and also, telling the Ghanaian Parliament that there are at least 16 different parties which are in coalition or ruling different states in India, which is a unique kind of experiment. And also, one of the largest elections that is held in India. So that connect with the countries of the Global South, which are also democracies, is a very huge connect. And they immediately respond to that kind of connection because they've also gone through a similar experience, and they know how important it is to keep their own democratic principles and the democratic governance system, because it gives freedom for people to exercise their voice very effectively. And this is what, therefore, has been emphasized by the Prime Minister.
There, on that note, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, Professor Rahul Mishra, many thanks for joining us through this special presentation of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much. And just to recap of the key developments, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi started the second leg of his five-nation visit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi earlier today arrived in Port of Spain, that's the capital of Trinidad and Tobago, the second leg of the five-nation tour. He was warmly welcomed by Prime Minister Prasar Bharati of Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, the whole cabinet had come to the airport in Port of Spain to welcome Prime Minister Narendra Modi as he arrived. This was his maiden visit as Prime Minister. It was followed by a ceremonial welcome for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, being welcomed at Port of Spain in Trinidad and Tobago. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, second leg of his five-nation visit in Trinidad and Tobago, visuals of the ceremonial welcome that took place. After ceremonial welcome, it was time for a vibrant cultural welcome as Prime Minister was introduced to the cabinet and the officials of Trinidad and Tobago. A special dance and music program which reflected the assimilation of Indian and local cultures in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean region was presented. Prime Minister Narendra Modi engaged with the leadership at the airport and also witnessed a special dance and cultural performance. The cultural welcome performance was followed by a special enthusiastic diaspora welcome for Prime Minister Narendra Modi as he reached his hotel at Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, chants of Bharat Mata Ki Jai and Indian music and traditional welcome for Prime Minister Modi. And vibrant and traditional welcome for Prime Minister Narendra Modi and elements of Indian culture and traditions to be seen all over. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has begun the second leg of his five-nation visit. Prime Minister is in Trinidad and Tobago, and we'll be getting you all the updates as they come in from Port of Spain. With that, we conclude this special presentation. Namaskar.